thank you for your patience. We're waiting for one more member before we have a quorum, and then we can begin. Yeah, and then when we Wonderful. We have a quorum. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Galgiani,
Present.
Valadeo, Berryhill, Hill, Ma, Mendoza, Olson, Perea, Yamada.
We've established a quorum, and I'd like to take up the rules today for the purpose of adoption. Do we have any questions from any of the members? No? Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second to adopt the rules? We have a motion and a second. Will the secretary please call the roll?
On the motion to adopt committee rules, Galgiani.
Aye.
Galgiani, aye. Valadeo. Valadeo, aye. Berryhill. Hill.
Aye.
Hill, aye. Ma. Mendoza. Olson.
Aye.
Olson, aye. Perea. Yamada. Yamada, aye. Rules are adopted.
Okay. Members, I have called this meeting together today to go over many of the background information that we will be looking at over the coming year. And much of the legislation that we'll hear, we'll be voting on, could affect these departments and the commissioners' activities in the future. So that I hope that the overview that we'll have from each of the departments today will provide us with the background that we have to ask the questions that we would have of the departments and the committee, the commissions, and the issues that are within this committee's jurisdiction. Those joining us today are Karen Ross, Secretary from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. The Department of Pesticide Regulation Deputy Director Chris Reardon has joined us. Agricultural Commissioners and Sealers Association Commissioners represented by Monterey County Agriculture Commissioner Eric Lauritsen and California Department of Conservation Acting Director Derek Chernow. I would like to ask Secretary Karen Ross to come forward to start our informational hearing. Thank you. And congratulations in your new role.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to, in my first few weeks on the job, to of Food and Agriculture. We're actually one of the older departments in the state because agriculture has been in the state since the beginning. I would like to take an opportunity to introduce our staff. I'm going to give a very brief, big picture overview, but I think one of the most important things I could do for you is to introduce the great staff that we have at CDFA. So if I could ask them all to stand up, I have Janet Glayholt, who's our Administrative Services Director, Robert Levert, who is our Plant Health and Pest Prevention Director, Rebecca Davis. Desmond, I'm so sorry. Desmond, who is our acting director for fairs and expositions. Kristen Macy, who is with Weights and Measures, and Dr. Annette Whiteford, who is in charge of animal health programs at the department. I also have Carla Sanchez, who many of you may already know. She's our great legislative staff, and Bob Wynn, who's my special assistant and the director of the Pierce's Disease Program. There may be many questions that you have for me today. They'll be happy to answer them in detail. I'm sure many of you know, because you are on this committee, what California agriculture means to the state of California. It's part of our tradition. It's part of our culture. Anybody who's lucky enough to get to eat 3 times a day knows that there's a farmer connected to their life somehow or the other. We actually have over 80,000 farms in the state of California. That's about 4% of the numbers of farmers nationally, but we produce over 13% of the total farm gate value. So we're very, very productive. We have over 400 commodities that we grow in the state very successfully because we're blessed with the climate that we have, with innovation that is partly based from the great research and the answers to questions that come from the UC system and the CSU system. We've been the leader in the nation of ag productivity and value for 63 years. That's as long as they've been keeping records, so we probably were leaders even before that. We also know that we're an important part of the economy with the jobs that we create, very specifically just in the range of exports. Our exports represent about 22.5% or more percent or more of the total farm gate value. Some years it's as high as 30%. If we average 22.5% of our farm gate value going into export markets on an annual basis, that represents a minimum of 96,000 jobs. So when we think exports, we have to think about job creation, and it's something that we can continue to do very, very well. It's also interesting in the last 10 years or more, the really innovative things that farmers are doing on their farms to increase their efficiency and increase their productivity, very specifically in the use of water and new irrigation technologies, where we've actually increased productivity, increased yields, increased value, and we're using less water than we did 10 years ago. It's also interesting to note that California is the leader in the nation in terms of our organic production. We have the largest number of organic farms, the largest number of acres in organic production, and the largest number of value in organic sales. California represents 19% of all organic farms in the country and 36% of all organic sales. It's a very fast-growing segment of the market. It may not be a huge part of our base, but it's an important alternative for farmers as they look at how do I capture more revenue so I can stay in the business for the next generation. The mission of the California Department of Food and Agriculture is to protect our state's agricultural resources so that we can grow food and fiber and increasingly opportunities to grow energy for people here and all around the world. Our core CDFA programs are dependent upon very strong partnerships with our friends, the Ag Commissioners, at the local level, and with our federal partner, the United States Department of Agriculture. It's very integrated types of programs. In fact, if you look at our budget, and industry is an important partner. If you look at our budget, about a third of our budget currently has been coming from the general fund. About a third comes from the federal government, primarily through USDA, and other special reimbursements from other agencies, and about a third comes from industry. So you can see it's a very integrated, comprehensive, and cooperative programs that we have. 2 of our core programs deal with protecting the citizens of the state from invasive pests that come into the state, oftentimes introduced because as we travel and have increased commerce, we have more opportunities for pests to arrive with that cargo and with passengers. We have built a very comprehensive surveillance and rapid response program through plant health and pest prevention, but those things are expensive to do. If we didn't have them, there would be much more devastation than we have had in recent years. For an example, 20 years ago, we created sterile insect release programs for medfly in the LA Basin. Those programs have been very successful. The statistics that I have is that since the mid-1990s, before we had the sterile fly release technology, there was an average of 7.5 medfly infestations every year that were detected in California. But since we've started the sterile release programs, There have been a total of 14 in that same period of time. So we continue to improve our technologies, working very closely with the research community to do new and innovative ways of doing very age-old problems. Right now, we're watching very closely what is happening in South and North Korea with foot and mouth disease. The animal health programs are here to protect our livestock industry and people from contagious animal diseases and to make sure that the feed that we give them and the drugs that we give them are high quality. We don't want foot and mouth disease in this country. It would mean putting down millions and millions of animals. So these programs are very important to have in place, and when they work really well, you don't know that they're there. And so it's easy to question, why are we spending money on these programs? Because when something is successful, preventing bad things from happening, it's very easy to say, out of sight, out of mind, why should we maintain these programs? The department is divided into 7 divisions. The first is the Animal Health and Food Safety Services, which, as I mentioned earlier, protects the livestock population from contagious diseases, and also provides food inspection programs at meat and poultry plants that are not inspected by federal inspectors. There's almost 500 plants that we do that for. Many of them are small and custom-size operations, but they're also present in some retail operations. That division is also responsible for Animal ID, the brand inspection program, which is an age-old program to prevent the theft of animals, which still happens as the value of the animals goes up. That's still something that happens. It's not just part of our cowboy past. Our plant health and pest prevention program protects us from the introduction of invasive pests and responds immediately to try to keep those pests from spreading. When we do it well, we're keeping the pests out because of things like the border inspection program, but we also have ongoing trapping and detection programs so that if an infestation does happen, we're able to respond immediately to keep the populations down and eradicate them and keep them from spreading. It's been a very successful program. It's obviously very dependent upon a continued working relationship and cost sharing with the counties as well as USDA. That program also enforces our quarantines, makes sure that phytosanitary certificates are available so that products can get into international trade. Our Division of Fairs and Expositions, for as long as we still have it, is responsible for the fiscal oversight and compliance issues for our fairs and expositions. As you probably are very familiar with, we have 52 active district agricultural associations, 23 county fairs, 2 citrus fairs, and of course the Cal Expo State Fair, which when my dad was alive loved to come visit me every year so he could visit the California State Fair, and that's hard for a Nebraskan to admit that somebody else has a better fair. Our Division of Measurement Standards is about 2 things. It's about making sure that the consumer's getting what they pay for and making sure that we have fair business practices and that there's not somebody trying to get by with unfair competition. We have a number of programs in that regard that are at the retail location to make sure that scanners are doing correctly, that the labeling is correct. We work very closely with county ag commissioners on that. But we also do things like checking the accuracy of packages for commodities, the accuracy of meters and scales, gas pumps, and checking on the quality of gasoline, diesel fuel, motor oil, and brake fluid. And as we see more interest in renewable fuels and especially bioenergy, it's a whole new category of people taking a look at to ensure that it's all being formulated that it's supposed to be and that everybody's competing the way they should. Our inspection services is an important part of ensuring that commodities meet quality and labeling standards. And there's a long list of things that happen at our inspection services. With almost 400 crops that can go into commerce, there's a lot of inspection to be done to make sure that the fruits, vegetables, and nuts are at the maturity standards they're supposed to be, that they're grading out the way they're supposed to be, the size, the weight, the packaging, the labeling, everything that is involved in meeting a consumer's expectations is inspected by our people there. We also have an outstanding chem lab, which is an important partner for the Department of Pesticide Regulation in doing the chemical analysis in support of food and environmental safety programs. We have inspectors that also ensure that fertilizer, animal feed, and livestock drugs are safe and effective. This is the division of the Department of Food and Agriculture that administers the organics program to make sure that the integrity of the program is maintained and that the products that are allowed to be used meet all the specifications to qualify as organic. And finally, this is inspection program is also what oversees the Leafy Green Marketing Agreement, which is a very innovative and important new food safety program for the produce industry. Worked very closely with marketing services and the industry itself to come up with the metrics and the standards for that program. It's proven to be very effective, and it's really doing a lot of state-of-the-art research in addition to maintaining the integrity of the program and that people are in compliance with the standards. We have marketing services, which oversees California's commodity programs. There's about 56 marketing programs that have been put together by the industry on a vote of the industry. The Marketing Act is a very unique and important tool that allows farmers to come together to do those things that they can't do themselves. They assess themselves, they set up the standards, it allows them to do some promotion activities, it allows a lot of really excellent research to happen in the state. There's 56 of those programs. The marketing division is also the division that oversees our milk pooling program and many of our dairy-related programs. And finally, we have administrative services, which makes sure that our HR programs are run the way that they should be, that we have sound financial management and best management practices when it comes to how we do our books and how we do our programs. They do a lot of our regulatory work for us, and most importantly, IT. And this is an area that we're investing in considerably. As we have a decline in the number of people that we have available, it's very important that we maintain our IT investment so that we can be as efficient as we possibly can and still be effective in what we've been charged to do. Just to give you very quickly what we've been doing on the budget this year, the governor's budget came out in January and directed the Secretary of Agriculture, me, to convene a consortium with the industry to look at our budget and identify $15 million that we could eliminate from general fund support for this year and an additional $15 million for next year, in addition to eliminating $32 million for the fairs and expositions. Although I was still in Washington, D.C. doing my day job, great CDFA staff worked with the industry, and we've been in a very open and transparent way, gone through everything in our budget, been very robust discussions about where are there alternative funding streams, including fees that could be increased because of services that people decide are a priority, if there are some alternatives working with the federal government, if there are reimbursements for our costs to do things like the border enforcement stations. All of that has been on the table. We have identified $15 million for this year. We're very close to finalizing what we think is possible for next year, and we're in the process of doing a really comprehensive risk assessment. Because as I mentioned in my beginning remarks, when we put in a very sophisticated and comprehensive surveillance system, for example, for pests or for animal diseases, if you start to chip away the edges, are you eliminating the ability to do what everyone's counting on you to do when that worst case scenario happens? So we want to take our time going into the second year to make sure that we haven't created some unintended consequences, knowing that whatever we end up with is going to create some pain for everyone that's involved. I really want to compliment my staff at CDFA for the work that they've done on that, and I also want to compliment the industry and the other stakeholder groups that we've been in conversation with. We feel like we've done a good job of reaching out to the people who will be most immediately affected. It may not be pleasant, but I think it's something that we can work with, and we're all in it together. Finally, I want to close on an upper note. It was very nice of the good Assemblyman Berryhill to join us. I feel very fortunate to follow in the footsteps of the famous Berryhill clan. And I want to touch just a moment on something you have been given a handout Carla put together of more in-depth information about the Department of Food and Agriculture, but we've also included a document in there called Ag Vision, which is a strategic plan for sustainability going forward. I'm very excited about this project. It's been 2 years in the making. It was initiated by the State Board of Food and Agriculture while I was still on the board, actually 2 years ago. It's all about the long-term viability of agriculture. What you do in the public policy arena very much has an impact on the ability of agriculture to survive and thrive and do good for the citizens of this state. So what we did over a 2-year period was we hosted a number of workshops up and down the state of California. We had over 500 participants in those workshops. We then contracted with the American Farmland Trust and got some grants to support a really in-depth, broad stakeholder process to to come around the vision that the State Board had identified for agriculture in the year 2030. That vision has 3 strategic goals. The better health and well-being of all Californians means that California agriculture is helping to meet the nutrition needs of California's diverse population. A healthier planet because of agricultural stewardship of the natural resource base upon which our productivity depends. Thriving communities, where we recognize that food production is a driver of sustainable California economic growth. We had a series of workshops with environmental representatives, labor representatives, the food access community, farmers, ranchers. It was a very broad base of stakeholders because we recognize that those 80,000 farmers and ranchers can't do all of this alone. It's very important that the people who depend upon us for food, for fiber, for open space, for habitat, for jobs, are involved in helping us craft a vision for agriculture moving forward and helping to craft the public policy atmosphere that will allow it to survive. And it's for reasons like coming together on Ag Vision that I'm very excited and I'm very optimistic about the future of California agriculture, and I feel very honored to have the position that I do and hope that I can serve you all well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We're very fortunate to have you and honored to have you
Thanks.
with CDFA. And I wanted to comment on the work that you and others from the industry have done to work with the administration to look for areas to make reductions and to find new ways for new fees and so forth. I think the ag community has always been very generous when they have issues that they need to address. As you mentioned earlier, the 56 commodity groups have formed to help themselves with research and marketing and so forth, and taken responsibility for their industry. And so I think going forward, it's important that we remember that whatever fees are put into place, potentially, that there be a nexus so that the industry truly receives back what they're being assessed for, because things are done so well, as you mentioned earlier. When things are working as they should, we don't even realize that the programs are there because there aren't any problems.
Yeah.
And that's how we want to keep it.
Yeah, and I think that the Department of Food and Agriculture historically has done a really good job of providing value, and that's why the agricultural community and other stakeholders are willing to come to the table, is because the value is there and the service is there. And I can't begin to tell you the dedication and the passion of the people who work at the department. I mean, they care deeply about agriculture and the fact that it continues to survive, and that if we're all creative and innovative like farmers are, we will find new ways of doing things and solve these problems. But the governor has also cautioned us, you know, these fees have to be tied to real services. We don't want to just be piling up on fees. We want to have a positive business atmosphere. So we're being very mindful when we look at each one of these that they're truly justified, and it's really, truly only about recapturing actual costs.
Mr. Berryhill.
Make it easy, please.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you, and I want to congratulate the governor on having a great pick for his ag secretary. And I've had the pleasure of working with Karen on the California Wine Grape Growers Board, and I can assure everybody on this committee that she has been a tremendous leader for what I believe is the finest ag commodity California raises, the wine industry. And but
push the button now.
yeah. But I very much look forward to working with you, and I know you've got a lot of challenges in the department and with our financial situation in California. But we'll get through all this, and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Assemblymember Perea.
Sure. And I, too, would just like to echo the comments and just congratulate you and just say that as a freshman, I look forward to working with you, considering that ag is such a big part of the district I represent, so and, of course, as part of this state. But I just kind of wanted to ask a quick question, something to follow up a little bit on some of your ending comments on bringing stakeholders together to really make sure that we're making the right decisions to ensure that our ag industry thrives. Do you see a role or do you see an opportunity for CDFA to bring all the regulatory agencies together to have a comprehensive discussion on all the regulations that our family farms have to you have to deal with? I mean, you have CARB and so many others, and it just the common concern that I hear from many of the family farms in my district is, hey, look, we're getting hit every which way, and there doesn't seem to be any coordination or any thought of the cumulative impact of what all these regulations mean. Do you see a role in convening those regulators and trying to come up with ways we can make things a little bit easier?
Absolutely. That's actually one of my top priorities is how can CDFA, with the tremendous technical and scientific expertise that we have, how do we engage earlier in the regulatory process, regardless of what the agency is, of providing good, sound data, impact analysis, alternative mitigation measures? How can we be of assistance in that so that we're effective earlier in the process of helping come up with better informed regulatory decisions? It's something that the governor is definitely encouraging us to do as cabinet members, to collaborate more closely, to flatten silos, to really look at what we're doing to eliminate redundancies. So I very much look forward to doing that.
Good.
I probably it'll be week 3 before I get started on that, but I am meeting with Secretary Laird tomorrow.
Well, that's great. And when you mention impact analysis, are you thinking financial impact analysis as well?
I think it has to be both economic as well as environmental, as well as just the practicalities of doing it.
Right.
And I think that if we do it because we're using the science and the scientific expertise of our department, which is something I worry about, how do we maintain that as it becomes harder and harder to compete for people with that kind of scientific background to come into the department, as we have people who are capable of retiring and how do we maintain the scientific expertise that is really fundamental to the credibility of every program that we manage? And if we use that in a credible way, I think we'll be adding value to the decision-making process.
I agree. I mean, I think there definitely needs to be some sort of third-party, impartial analysis on that, at least on the science side, because I mean that's where everything starts. And if you start a conversation where nobody can agree on the science, then no one's going to be happy with the outcome, right? So I'm glad to hear that you're moving in that direction, and I would love to, talk to whomever's appropriate in your office just about just being engaged in the process or just knowing the process as it moves along. But I'm glad to hear that you guys are moving that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Yamada.
Thank you, Chair Galgiani, and my congratulations as well. I look very much forward to working with you. I represent the 8th Assembly District, which is Yolo and Solano County. Yes, I think Yolo is pretty much on the map as a very fierce agricultural county. I do have 10 cities in my district as well and spent most of my life in an urban setting. So coming to Yolo County about 15 years ago was a wonderful new chapter for me in acquiring greater understanding of rural-urban interface. And I just wanted to also say I'm very privileged to now be chairing a select committee on sustainable and organic ag. Intend to work very closely with as many committee members as well as your staff as we go forward on that. I think we're going to be putting that a little bit in abeyance until we get through some other major issues before the legislature, but I appreciate your comments about organic ag. Surprisingly, the largest number of producers in the state are in San Diego. Go figure. But one other comment I wanted to make is I believe Craig McNamara, who I'm proud to say is also a Winters resident, is very
State Board Chair.
Yes, right, State Board Chair now. And so we'll have a lot of local and statewide connections going forward. Hope that we can also work on additional issues of food security, both supply and safety. And then I think for me, food justice and access to fresh and fruits and vegetables for all Californians.
Yes, and I think Secretary Dooley is very interested in having those kinds of conversations too. If we really focus on our food and the healthy things that we grow as part of the health and nutrition of our citizens, there could be cost savings as well as improved quality of life. So I think there's tremendous opportunities.
Well, we also know, just one last note, that CalFresh or SNAP, food stamps, is well known, and popular jargon, it's 100% federal. So I think we should make sure that we get all that that we are entitled to. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Without any further questions?
Questions, come on.
Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you. And we now have Chris Reardon, Deputy Director of the Department of Pesticide Regulation. Thank you very much. And Assemblymember Valadeo, our Vice Chair, welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, members, before Mr. Reardon begins his presentation, I'd like to make a quick statement for the record. As members of the committee may be aware, on December 30th of 2010, a lawsuit was filed in Alameda County Superior Court seeking declaratory and injunctive relief against the Department of Pesticide Regulations and Arista Life Science North America, LLC. The lawsuit challenges that the State Department of Pesticide Regulations December 20th approval of methyl iodide for use in California on the grounds that it violates the California Environmental Quality Act, the California Birth Defects Prevention Act, and the Pesticide Contamination Prevention Act. With these facts in mind, I would like to advise Mr. Reardon, as well as committee members, that I fully understand the need to avoid discussing any information relating to the development of the methyl iodide regulations or relating to the issues covered by the legal action involving the department. It is my hope that my fellow committee members will respect the need to avoid any potential legal exposure facing the people of California which may result from such questioning of Mr. Reardon. I would also like to state for the record that it is my hope that the Governor and the Attorney General will advise the Department of Pesticide Regulation to refrain from appearing before the joint informational hearing of the Environmental Safety and Toxic Substances as the Health Committee scheduled for next week. I believe it is inappropriate to require the staff or the staff department facing this type of litigation to be asked to publicly speak on issues relating to the lawsuit currently underway. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to express my concerns.
Thank you. Do we have any other members that would like to comment before we proceed with Mr. Reardon's presentation? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, Chris Reardon, Chief Deputy Director, Department of Pesticide Regulation. It is great to be here. It's great to see you, Madam Chair. If I could, what I handed out just to let you know, it's sort of our biannual progress report that we're very proud of and describes the accomplishments that DPR has had over the last couple of years. So I know you don't have a lot of time and you probably have plenty of reading, but just for your pleasure, when you have some time, I'd like to have you review it and would happy to answer any questions about it as well. I would try to be very brief in terms of who we are and what we do, but who is the Department of Pesticide Regulation? We're one of the 5 departments and boards in the California Environmental Protection Agency. Our mission is to protect human health and the environment by regulating pesticide sales and use and fostering reduced risk management. We manage the most comprehensive state regulatory program in the country through an emphasis on prevention and more target-specific pesticides to protect people and the environment. What does DPR do? We conduct pesticide product evaluation, registration, and risk mitigation for public health and safety. We provide continuous surveillance and evaluation of pesticides after they're in use. We maintain the most extensive pesticide use reporting system in the country, and therefore I would say in the world. We license agricultural pest control advisors, applicators, aircraft pilots, and others who use pesticides to ensure competency in the state of California. Also, in October of 2009, as part of a budget agreement, we now have the Structural Pest Control Board under the jurisdiction of the department. Our budget is funded by registration and licensing fees, along with a 2.1 cents per dollar mill assessment collected at the wholesale level, as we call the mill. We have about 415 employees, including 30 toxicologists and more than 150 environmental scientists, in addition to field enforcement augmented by about 275 biologists working for commissioners throughout our state in all 58 counties. How are we regulated? Pesticides must be registered by US EPA and DPR before they can be sold in California. Registration process includes a scientific evaluation of hazards of pesticides to ensure they can be used safely without harming people and the environment. The label is the primary source of instructions. As most of you know, when you go to a store and you want to buy something at a market, the first thing you do is read a label. It's no different on the structural side and on the agricultural side. The label is the instruction. In California, California Ag Commissioners enforce the law at the local level. And let me just say, we can't do our job without our local Ag Commissioners. They are our pesticide use enforcement at the local level. They are our eyes and ears. And we also provide, in terms of budget, a portion of our mill assessment goes directly to the Ag community, or the Ag Commissioner community. So we can't do it alone. How are pesticides used? We register approximately 13,000 products a year in California. Pesticide sales split between ag and non-ag is almost 50-50, including institutional products like water sanitizers, home and garden pesticides, bleach that you wash your clothes with, sort of a whole variety of venues and menus in California related to pesticides. Each year, approximately 160 to 180 million pounds of pesticides are used in agriculture. Another 10 to 15 million pounds are used for structural pest control board or structural pest control, landscape maintenance, mosquito abatement, and other. Home and garden and industrial uses are exempt from reporting in California. Integrated pest management continues to be a priority within the department in both the urban and agricultural settings. IPM, as it is so commonly known, emphasizes natural control, prevention, pesticides less toxic to people and the environment, chemicals that are safer to use, produce less waste, and require less energy and resources. And quite a bit of new technology, as most of you are aware, have gone into new techniques and new processes that I'm going to talk about in a moment related to a grant program that we oversee. The realities and challenges facing the department. California is unique in the nation, balancing a need with public, farm worker, and environmental protection. Our many microclimates produce more than 50% of the nation's fruits, nuts, and vegetables, and as a result, specialty crops require hand labor with the potential to overexpose farm workers to pesticides. Urban encroachment means buffer zones and other restrictions on pesticide applicators and agricultural urban interface to minimize risks to the public. Compliance for clean air and water. Monitoring fresh produce from pesticide residues. And by the way, let me just say, with all the trade agreements that we have and the increasing amount of materials, products that come into California from all over the world, it's becoming more challenging, not less challenging, as it relates to pesticide residue. So, and also, besides Hawaii, we're second in terms of endangered species list. So we have our fair share of challenges in California. Our grants and recognition program, Pesticide Alliance grants. For those of you who are aware, I see some people in the room that have attended some of our Innovator Awards, and it's an award that recognizes efforts to reduce pesticide use, and we share methods with other people. Over the last 10 years, or actually 15 years, we've recognized more than 100 California organizations that are looking at alternatives to pesticides. Our Pest Management Line Grant program that's appropriated every year through DPR allows IPM practices that reduce or eliminate pollution of pesticide exposure in agricultural and urban environments. Approximately $10 million in grant funding has been awarded for 200 projects since 1998. And we're going to be rolling out our next Alliance Grant program here in the next probably 30 days. So a very successful program that, by the way, stakeholders on all sides have been very supportive of over the last 10 years or so. And then finally, ongoing issues, the challenges. I talked a little bit about the challenges, some ongoing issues that I want to make you aware of. Fumigant use will continue to be a challenge in the state of California. When you look at, we have 38 million people and growing. The corridors between the urban and the rural are closing every day. It's become more challenging in California for fumigant use, not less challenging. So that's going to continue to be a use or a challenge. Surface water protection. Pesticide continue to be detected in surface water from both urban and agricultural settings despite efforts to control discharges. We've had extensive stakeholder meetings over the last 2 years to look at, on both sides, both in the ag and the urban sector, and we're going to probably be rolling out sometime later this spring a surface water regulation that we hope, we're in the process now of sort of determining. We might just focus on urban initially, then go to the agriculture setting because it's enormously complex, and we understand that it's going to take some time to do it, and we've made a commitment to stakeholders that we're going to take our time and get it right. The other thing that we're doing this year is an air monitoring program, air monitoring network. We've selected 3 sites throughout the state: Ripon in San Joaquin County, Salinas in Monterey County, and Shafter in Kern County. And really the goal is to improve risk assessment by evaluating collected data and evaluate effectiveness of protective measures against pesticide use. We noted those communities. We had a sort of some interesting criteria having to do with population, age, pesticide use in those areas, and we ranked them accordingly, and we selected those three communities for pesticide monitoring for probably the next 3 to 5 years. So we're going to roll that out sometime this spring as well. I'm thinking March timeframe, but that's going to be a challenge for us as well. So, Madam Chair, sort of in a nutshell, that sort of explains who we are and what we do, and would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from any of the members? Any comments? Assemblymember Berryhill?
Yeah, Chris. You guys regulate not only pesticides, you're doing fungicides, herbicides, all the above, right?
That's correct.
Has there been a reduction over the last, say, 10 years, or pick a time frame, in California on the use of all these pesticides?
I would say if you noted in your the book that I just gave you, if particularly on the most toxic pesticides, I would say in the last 15 years we've seen a general reduction in what we call the Class A or Class 1 pesticides, the most toxic elements.
There's a lot of new safe science out there.
A lot of new safe science, and about 5 years ago too, we helped eliminate a loophole in the law that really made it difficult to incentivize for new pesticide products in California. So we cleared that problem, and so not only has it been not only for cost, in our estimation, it's improved the efficiency of our department. Plus, we believe it's reduced the most toxic products that have been used in the marketplace historically.
Terrific. Well, we appreciate you being in your position and look forward to working with you.
Good to see you, sir.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you very much. Mr. Reardon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you.
Thank you. You as well. Next, we have Mr. Lauritsen. Commissioner Lauritsen is representing the State Commissioners and Sealers Association and is from Monterey County. Commissioners play a critical role for the state programs in management of the day-to-day activities and enforcement for both CDFA and DPR. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to see an old friend, Jim Collin. You've got my bio, but I've been in this business for a long time, worked under 7 directors, and including Claire Berryhill, and it's a pleasure to work with Karen Ross now, who I've had the opportunity to work with in a different capacity over the last few years. So it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I will say I'm sorry that Assemblymember Ma isn't here, who spent some time with our association, spoke at our annual conference this year, and has spent time out in various districts learning about agriculture, and so it's a tribute to you and to her to educate yourselves about the issues affecting agriculture. So I'm really excited to see an invigorated committee, and I'm sure you're going to have a number of challenges before you in the coming year. You've heard from Secretary Ross and Chris Reardon from the department about the complexity and diversity and size of agriculture, but I did want to point out California's size with respect to the production, which each county produces an annual crop report. If you look sort of at our top 5 producers, Fresno, Tulare, Monterey, Monterey I might mention, Kern, if I didn't say Monterey, Merced. But if you look even just at the top 3, we exceed the production value of Kansas. I was going to use Nebraska, but I thought it would be inappropriate. I've been in the business for a while. Also backing up, I got to say, with respect to the Department of Pesticide Regulation, it's been a pleasure to work with Chris and Marianne Warmerdam and her predecessors. There's only been 3 directors, and I've been able to see the transition from a previous life into the Cal EPA system, which has worked out well, and it's a pleasure working with them. We talked about sort of the complexity, diversity, and size of agriculture, and what that has done in California is built this unique system that we call Ag Commissioners that work with our state partners, CDFA and DPR. It was established in 1881, and even before the Department of Food and Agriculture was established in 1919 or 1920, where the horticultural commissioners at the time were brought under, dealing with pest issues and quarantine and that sort of thing. But the uniqueness of California has created this system of ag commissioners, so there's an ag commissioner in every county in California, 58 counties, 54 commissioners, some counties that share. That unique system is those ag commissioners are appointed by the Board of Supervisors but serve under the direction of the Secretary of Agriculture and the Department of Pesticide Regulation. very unique, the only place in the nation where we have county agricultural commissioners. When you speak of an agricultural commissioner throughout the nation, it typically refers to the secretary position or a State Department. So very unique system. Our association, CACASA, California Ag Commissioner and Sealers Association, have one of our members from Yuba County, Louis Mendoza, and our legislative advocate, Matt Seiberling here. Didn't bring a lot of staff like Secretary Ross did, but I have them to hopefully back me up if you got any tough questions. But this system of ag commissioners has really worked well, not just in complementing state government, but addressing local issues and working with local agencies, other departments, and a variety of agencies, including our federal partners, USDA, and our congressional members. Briefly, some of the programs that you've already heard about, plant quarantine and pest prevention. We're responsible for enforcing at the local level quarantine laws at the county level. Pest exclusion, trying to keep pests out, is sort of the cornerstone of our program. Detection, placing traps and servicing them to try and detect a pest should it come in so that we can find it quickly and deal with it. And then, of course, management if we do find a pest and working with our state and federal partners in dealing with that. Pest management, we also deal with vertebrate pest problems. We have cooperative agreements with USDA for animal damage control. We deal at the local level with a variety of weed pests, whether it be a biological control agent that we deal with or mechanical or chemical means. We also have interior quarantines within our own counties. We deal with lettuce mosaic virus and some other diseases, and it's different from county to county, and so that unique system of having local knowledge and local issues really complements the state system we have. You heard a very good overview of the pesticide use enforcement program in California from Chris Reardon, and as Chris said, we are the boots on the ground. We're the ones that are out doing the inspections. One of our important functions is to deal with pesticide illness. If there is an exposure and it is reported, we are the ones that investigate that, and we have the Department of Pesticide Regulation as a resource to support us in those efforts. We do application inspections, pre-application inspections, site visits, surveillance, and deal with pretty much any kind of pesticide issue that comes up. And as Chris noted, even bleaches. So we're dealing with industrial exposures to pesticides as well as agricultural and structural uses. We're also responsible for fruit, nut, and vegetable inspection, apiary inspection, variety of programs ensuring compliance with state law. And again, if it wasn't clear, we are the local inspection agency, but we enforce state law for the most part. Some of the other programs that we're involved with, we inspect eggs to ensure compliance with quality, size, grading, grade and labeling standards. I mentioned apiary. I also mentioned at the outset that we annually, by code, produce a crop report for each county, which is a real valuable tool in each county in compiling for the state state total. You also heard from Secretary Ross about our weights and measures program. Each county also, while it won't come to this committee most likely, we are the sealers of weights and measures called out in the Business and Professions Code and deal with all the issues that you heard Karen talk about relative to weights and measures. Some other activities that individual counties embark on, depending on the issue, depending on the Board of Supervisors and the local interests. We deal with a variety of land use issues, so we'll be dealing with Williamson Act, for instance. Some counties play a vital role with Williamson Act. We may be the ones responsible for inspecting underground storage tanks for fuel. Some are air pollution control officers, domestic animal regulation. I was in Sonoma County and was the dog catcher, as it were. Very challenging position, but our ag commissioners do wear a variety of hats. As time goes on, we're having much more involvement with issues like water, food safety, and finding some regulatory overlap, and I think that's one thing that will definitely be coming to your committee. I think there was a question over here about sort of regulatory overlap and the need for consolidation or at least coordination. We deal with agricultural outreach and education, work with the fairs, and do a variety of other things in terms of training. And with pesticides, we spend a fair amount of time doing training and outreach around pesticides. We'll deal with our local sheriff on ag crime issues. Some of those issues will potentially come before your committee. And we're responsible for biological control issues. to kind of sort of wrap up some of the issues that we're facing now, and you've heard about invasive pests, Asian citrus psyllid. If you were here at all before this, you know about light brown apple moth. More recently, the introduction of European grapevine moth, and we continue to work with glassy winged sharpshooter and many other pests in California. It's been stated by me and by Chris Reardon, I think water and regulatory overlap. I think your committee looked at some bills last year where there's an intent to try and use our regulatory system relative to water quality, and I think that's going to become more and more of an issue and a challenge. I'd say the Department of Pesticide Regulation and our association has taken a leadership role relative to water and pesticides, established a committee, and we're working with not just the Department of Pesticide Regulation and our ag commissioners, but the state water board and regional water quality control boards. In terms of, well, I'll pass over since Chris dealt with fumigants a little bit, and one member talked about that. I will tell you that it doesn't stop with the State Department of Agriculture or State Department of Pesticide Regulation when it comes to lawsuits. We locally get the benefit of being respondents to lawsuits as well. I'd be happy to talk to you at length about some that we've resolved. I think when it comes to budget, we're really dependent upon an interdependency with CDFA and DPR. When it comes to budget, we get a substantial amount of state funding. We get local funding. We're about a $152 million program if you look at California and our programs, county programs. About 100 of that is funded by state or other funds, and about 52 million is in county general fund. And while that may seem like a small amount statewide, we're small but mighty, and that sort of connection and that local general fund contribution is enormously important in bringing home the importance of agriculture and the programs that we serve, and the importance of uniformity in California, because we're really only as strong as our weakest link. Collectively, we continue to work with the Department of Food and Agriculture and Department of Pesticide Regulation, but as I mentioned, also county agencies, other state agencies. You're going to hear from the Department of Conservation, Department of Industrial Relations, Department of Forestry, Fish and Game, all those that we interact with. I mentioned the federal government. We work closely with USDA, and some of the money is passed through CDFA to us from the federal government. We have a very strong congressional contingent that is very supportive of agriculture. Just to name a few congressional members that are important: Congressman Farr, Cardoza, Costa, and Baca, who are in leadership roles in Congress that help support California agriculture, and our relationship with them is vital. A delegation of ag commissioners is going in 2 weeks to Washington, D.C. To pitch these invasive species issues and pesticides and a variety of things. Legislatively, I'd say we've worked with this committee on agricultural civil penalties. We have the authority to levy fines at the local level, and we do that judiciously, but it's very effective. We've been very much a resource, even if we're not bringing a bill before your committee, but we've been a resource to the committee on pesticide issues, school buffers, a variety of different kinds of issues that come up that are challenging, and will continue to be a resource to your committee in that regard. And lastly, I'll mention water. I think water is going to come back to you, and these regulatory overlaps. I think that's something that we're going to have to deal with in the future. We can't maintain these silos, whether it's county and state or different state agencies, regional boards. We've really got to do a better job, and it's not just because of budget. It's the right thing to do. So I'd like to close with what I think is real important, the relationships between our offices and you, our partners, our state partners. I very much look forward to working with Secretary Ross and continuing to work with the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And it is those relationships, I think, that builds a strong sort of government structure in California that's unique to the nation, and rightly so because of the size and importance of agriculture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Turno. Do we have any?
Mrs. Lorenzen.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lorenzen.
Right, I've been called worse.
My apologies.
It's really nice to be in front of this group as opposed to my board of supervisors. So my next challenge from a budget standpoint.
Thank you.
I mean, you could turn that, I guess, for me, but go ahead.
Mr. Berryhill?
Eric, we look forward to working with you very much. If Karen was still here, I would advise her to get very close to her commissioners, because you guys are really the boots on the ground, and you're the first line of defense when there's an outbreak. You're the ones that are there. My dad, when he was director of agriculture, loved his commissioners and tried to spend as much time with them, and really had a lot of great relationships because he knew the importance. He totally valued what you guys do. And I will say the commissioners in agriculture are generally pretty fair and balanced when they try to, and this would be a good lesson for a lot of regulatory agencies, is they generally try to help you, not just hammer you. And if you're a little out of compliance, they might direct you, and by golly, you better do it. But they work with us instead of against us. And so I very much appreciate you being in the position, and look forward to working with you.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Yamada?
Thank you. Just one quick question. I did want to say that I had the great pleasure of working with Rick Landon, who retired, and now Jim Young out of YOLO, and starting to work with our Solano County folks as well. You mentioned eggs.
Yes.
And so is it going to be the agricultural commissioners that are going to be monitoring Proposition 2, with the means of production and the standards for California eggs, or is that somewhere else? That's somewhere else?
Yeah, we're only fortunately, quite frankly, dealing with eggs and the quality, size, and labeling requirements.
Okay, the weights and measures angle. I think that's a part of the, so I wonder which agency is it that's going to be addressing Prop 2, as well as there is equivalence now with any eggs that are brought into the state also have to conform to those standards. So that's a good thing for California egg producers. But I think that one piece of weights and measures is really not very well understood by the general public, what your roles and responsibilities are. So I don't know what we can do to ensure that Californians understand that, when they go to a gas pump and they see that seal, that's the ag commissioners. But
it's an enormously important consumer protection activity, relatively small, again, powerful, but small but powerful. We do a great job throughout the state of California, and unlike other states, quite frankly.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your
Madam
comments
Chair.
and questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, I just wondered, Mr. Berryhill made a comment earlier. He asked whether there was the view from Chris Reardon as to whether we had seen a reduction in pesticide use in the state. Do you have a particular view on that?
Yeah, and they would be the appropriate agency to look at, but Chris answered the question very well. I think what we're seeing most dramatically is a reduction in the most toxic materials, organophosphates, carbamates. We're seeing an enormous reduction in those, both from materials that are not being registered anymore, but also use patterns going down, softer science, more effective. And there's great motivation on the part of applicators to use softer materials. We're seeing a continued increase in organic production, although it still remains a very small portion. But also keep in mind, although the toxicity may be down, you may have to use more materials. So the weight of material is how things are measured in California. So you really have to look very critically at what the materials are, not just how much is being used. So looking at kind of the category of materials, fumigants, which we've talked about, real important to look at fumigant use, and these carbamates and organophosphates. Those things are going down over time, and I think we're seeing softer science being used across the board.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you so very much.
For your time.
And now we have Mr. Derek Chernow, Acting Director, Department of Conservation. Welcome, and thank you.
Thank you.
And joining him will be Brian Leahy, Assistant Director, Department of Conservation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Galgiani, members. As the chairperson mentioned, I am Derek Chernow, the Acting Director for the Department of Conservation. And as a former staffer to a previous Agriculture Committee chair, I appreciate your commitment to preserving and strengthening California's rich farming history. I'd like to start by giving a brief overview of the department's program areas, and then I will turn it over to Brian Leahy, Assistant Director in charge of our Division of Land Resource Protection. We will then answer any questions you may have, and we'll try to keep it brief in respect to your calendars today. The Department of Conservation is comprised of 4 separate divisions and 1 board. We have the Division of Land Resource Protection, headed by Mr. Leahy. It administers the California Land Conservation Act, or Williamson Act. It protects the state's heritage lands through the California Farmland Conservancy Program, and advances sustainable management of California's watersheds through the statewide watershed program. The California Geological Survey oversees the state's geology, seismology, and mineral resources with an emphasis on public health and safety. The Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources regulates the state's oil, gas, and geothermal drilling operations and facilities, with an emphasis on the protection of our natural resources and public health and safety. The Office of Mine Reclamation works with local government to administer the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act. And the State Mining and Geology Board represents the state's interest in the development and preservation of our mineral resources and serves as the appeals board for issues related to geology, mining, and mines. In essence, at the Department of Conservation, our core mission is managing California's working lands. We do this by providing services and information that promote environmental health, economic vitality, informed land use decisions, and sound management of the state's natural resources. And let me introduce Brian Leahy.
It's a pleasure being here. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Leahy.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, and staff. I think some of you know my wife is staff for the water, so I have to remember staff.
We do.
Okay. So you're going to have to excuse me. I'm going to read this because it's fairly compact information, but the Division of Land Resource Protection helps provide information, grants, and technical assistance to protect agricultural and open space lands and supports land use planning and watershed management. The division serves as the state lead in fostering and supporting the conservation of California's irreplaceable farmland. The division has 4 programs relevant to the conservation of farmland: the Williamson Act, Open Space Act, California's Farmland Conservancy Program, the Farmland Mapping and Monitoring Program, and the Watershed Program, which works with the resource conservation districts. In addition, we have a recent program, which is the Sustainable Communities Planning Grants on behalf of the Sustainable Growth Council. All of the programs are voluntary, local assistance programs that work with local entities to bring about statewide benefits. The Williamson Act program receives all of its fundings from the Conservation Fund, which is funded from Williamson Act cancellation fees. The other programs are funded from a combination of soil conservation funds and bond support money. The Division of Land Resource Protection receives no general funds. The Williamson Act, the purpose of it's really called the California Land Conservation Act, or Williamson Act of 1965, correct, is to assure sufficient food supplies, to discourage the premature and unnecessary conversion of agricultural lands, to discourage discontinuous urban development patterns, and to preserve the open space and aesthetic values of agricultural lands. The Williamson Act is really 3 interlocking laws. The first, of course, is the California Land Conservation Act of 1965. Most counties and that is really a state statute. Most counties, a few local governments, have local ordinances that also define what is and what is not appropriate under the Williamson Act. The second law is actually the Constitution. It's Article 13, Section 8 of the state Constitution. And that allows the county assessors to assess Williamson Act contracted lands using a formula established by the State Board of Equalization and the Revenue and Tax Code. The land tax savings vary drastically based on a number of factors, such as how close you are to urban development and how much income your land's generating. The most benefits are received by people with lower income crops, such as grazing. Grazing, we would not have a grazing industry in the state without the Williamson Act. Contracts are for rolling 10 or 20-year terms with automatic renewals until the landowner or the county files a non-renewal, which begins the 10 or 20-year wind-down period. The third law is the Open Space Subventions Act, which was created in 1971. Subventions are money paid to the counties to make up for losses in the property tax revenue due to participating in the Williamson Act. Since 1972-73, the general fund has paid out about $875 million in direct subventions to the participating county governments, averaging about $38 million for several years. The subvention payments were reduced to about $1,000 last year in response to the state's financial situation. Currently, there are 53 counties that have land under contracts. As a voluntary program, the Act protects about 16.5 million acres, which is about 1/3 of all the private land in the state. Prior to entering into a Williamson Act contract, local governments must first create agricultural preserves. In some counties, all the land that's not in urban development is in a preserve. Many land activities are disruptive and are in conflict with activities necessary to produce food and fiber. In the Williamson Act, contracts and agricultural preserves give local governments, and in some instances the state, a larger say in what land use activities can occur in agricultural land. Other state laws are linked to the Williamson Act, such as the Planning and Zoning Law, the Subdivision Map Act, the LAFCOS, the Community Redevelopment Law, and Appendix G of CEQA. The CEQA guidelines are very important, and the division makes comments, CEQA comments, on many developments that convert important food land to other uses. Last year, the legislation created a new temporary local option, this SB 863, where local governments can reduce the period of contracts by 10% while collecting 10% of the tax savings of the Williamson Act landowners. So far, 8 counties have adopted this option, which sunsets January 1st, 2015. Okay, another program we have is the Farmland Conservancy Program, which provides grant funds to local governments and nonprofit land trusts in purchasing agricultural conservation easements from willing sellers on lands subject to development pressure. The program also provides policy and planning grants to assist local land trusts to foster agricultural land conservation. Since its inception, the program has completed 132 agricultural conservation easements on 43,000 acres of strategically important farmland. The program works closely with its counterparts in the federal government, USDA, NRCS, which provides matching funds for many of these easements. Communities use farmland conservation easements to protect farmland and to direct development towards desired paths. The program has also been instrumental in developing a few regional land trusts that are now taking an active role in the protection of farmland. Another important service provided by the division is the Farmland Mapping and Monitoring Program, which was established in 1982 to provide decision makers with consistent, timely, and accurate data on California's agricultural land resources. Agricultural land is mapped according to soil quality and irrigation status using a geographic information service, aerial imagery, site surveys, and input from local stakeholders. 5 agricultural activities or categories, as well as the extent of urban land, are monitored for change every 2 years. Soil information is derived from USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service soil maps, and the best quality agricultural lands are considered prime farmland. Important farmland maps are used to determine the significance of land use conversion proposals under CEQA. They are used in conjunction with other data for planning open space or flood corridors, environmental restoration projects, and related uses. The urban land information and its changes over time are used in growth projections modeling. Recent legislation required that important farmland status of properties be disclosed to buyers as part of the real estate transaction process to inform them of potential conflicts with agricultural uses. Every 2 years, the Farmland Mapping and Monitoring Program documents land use changes on 49.1 million acres in 49 counties, which represents 98% of the privately owned land in the state. Between 1984 and 2008, the program has documented the conversion of more than 1.3 million acres out of agricultural use. The Watershed and Resource Conservation Districts program is also an important component of protecting agricultural land. The statewide watershed program is an integrated approach to natural resource management using community-based approaches to restore ecological health and improve water management by working with the community at a watershed level. With the latest round of grant awards, there will be approximately 100 professional organizers helping local communities achieve both local and statewide objectives of a safe, reliable water supply. Using locally conducted watershed assessments, the coordinators assist the community in making improvements in how natural resources are managed to meet the many local demands and expectations that surround the resources of the watershed. In agricultural communities, watershed work ranges from helping growers adapt to water efficiency technology to meeting ever-changing regulatory requirements. Many of the watershed grants are housed in local resource conservation districts, which are local units of government that work with local landowners to meet environmental challenges and opportunities on a voluntary basis. And finally, our Sustainable Communities Planning Grants, which is the division is administering these grants, and they're planning grants and planning incentives that reduce energy consumption, conserve water, improve air quality and water quality, and provide other community benefits, including the preservation of important agricultural land. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from members? Mr. Berryhill?
With the proposal to eliminate Williamson Act, how many folks administer that in your department? Roughly.
Yeah, roughly there's about 6 folks that do that as full-time job.
Yeah. So conceivably, has there ever been any discussions on merging some of the departments or anything, because all of a sudden you don't have Williamson Act, so your workforce has gone down a little bit, your employee base, and
actually been cutting workforce on Williamson Act ever since I received this position. Because you could, well, for different reasons, but one is you could see the handwriting on the wall.
Yeah.
We still have an oversight function. What has been reduced is subvention payments. But even if all of the counties did what Imperial County did and opt to non-renew, it's still a 10-year wind-down period.
So you got to wind down over a long time, so you still need the administration to, yeah. Well, I would just say that you guys, do a great job. I've got a wetland restoration project through the NRCS, and you're terrific folks to work with, and so very much look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you.
Madam
Assemblymember Yamada?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, thank you to you both for your continuing efforts to protect California's most important agricultural and open space lands. To follow up a little bit on what Mr. Berryhill was talking about, and certainly since the Williamson Act was the sword I fell on with my first no vote on the budget in December 2009, what can we do? I mean, this may not be a fair question, but, I believe the Williamson Act is perceived to be a Republican issue, and it's not. It's a California issue, and I, too, share, I think it's Commissioner Lauritsen's statement that Fiona Ma is not present, because, it's the kind of member that Fiona Ma is, who is a liberal Democrat from certainly not a very farm there's no farmland in San Francisco that I'm aware of except for the Victory Gardens. We need to ensure that our urban members understand that agriculture, aside from its very key position in terms of our economic recovery in California, is also, the foundation for us not becoming too reliant on foreign food, for example, and we already are. So we don't want to get to a position in our state that we are as dependent on foreign oil as we are on foreign food. So, do you have any suggestions, about how we can do better to ensure? Maybe we will have to make sure that our Democratic members are all present for these hearings, but that's our job. But, as particularly for the urban members who really seem to be very disconnected from where their food comes from, and it's linked to the Conservation Act. I just don't know what else we can do.
Right. And you kind of preface it by saying this may be an unfair question.
Yes, it is.
And it is a little bit, but obviously there's plenty of stakeholder groups that would love to take members out and show them around. So, I would urge you to contact stakeholders that we deal with every day.
One last question. That one year that the previous governor elected to reduce the subvention account to $1,000, I think adding insult to injury, some counties receive checks like for 10 cents or 1 penny. Is that a requirement in the law that despite the amount of money in the account that the controller is required?
Exactly.
Well, at the very least, perhaps, I don't know, I know it's too late for bill deadline, probably we'd have to have a vehicle, but we ought to make sure that just in general, as a state policy, we probably shouldn't be sending checks to entities that cost more to produce than the check is worth. And, Williamson was just one example. I'm sure there are many others, but certainly look forward to advancing this discussion and ensuring that, it's seen as a California issue. So thank you so much for your help.
We appreciate it. And if I can just take one more second, Chair.
Sure.
We don't often get a chance to say thank you to staff, and I just want you to know that your staff with the Agriculture Committee is fantastic, and we enjoy continuing to work with them. So thank you.
Thank you. We're very fortunate. Thank you. Thank you to our ag staff as well. Without any further ado, thank you to our panelists for their presentations. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.